The first time I heard about the Wendigo was from my grandfather, a quiet man who never raised his voice, never told stories unless asked, and always locked every window before the sun set, no matter the season. We used to think he was just old-fashioned, a remnant of a time when people believed the forest could swallow you whole, when hunger made monsters of men and whispers in the trees were warnings instead of wind. But I know now that he was trying to protect us from something he never fully explained, only hinted at when he'd sip his coffee slowly, staring out the frost-bitten kitchen window of our family cabin deep in the northern Ontario woods, tapping one finger against the glass in slow, nervous rhythm, like he was counting down to something inevitable. The stories only came after his second stroke, when he could no longer walk without help, and his words slurred just enough to make us lean in closer, as though the things he remembered refused to come out cleanly. He'd talk about men who went missing in the blizzards, their bodies never found, just long dragging tracks in the snow that would stop mid-path with no signs of struggle or blood. Or about the time his cousin Teddy came running into town barefoot and naked in the middle of January, screaming about a thing with no lips and eyes like smoke that followed him for 5 miles and called his name in someone else's voice. I chalked it all up to senility, to isolation, and the kind of stories you tell kids to keep them from wandering too far out past the firelight. Until I found the trail camera he forgot he set up behind the shed, half buried in snow and its battery nearly dead. When I clicked through the images, most were just empty shots of tree trunks and falling snow. But then I saw something on the fourth to last photo, a tall, thin figure standing at the edge of the woods, nearly blending into the trees, but not quite, because its limbs were too long and its head too high, and the eyes were 2 pinpricks of light staring straight into the lens, as if it knew the camera was there. I didn't sleep that night, and when I showed the photo to my grandfather, his face went pale in a way I didn't think was possible for someone who had already lost so much color to age. He whispered something I couldn't understand, over and over, until I left the room, but I wrote it down phonetically as best I could, Wee-tiku. And when I Googled it, the hits came back fast. Wendigo, a legend from Algonquin folklore, a spirit born from greed and cannibalism, the thing that stalks the starving and the selfish, that mimics human voices to lure you into the trees and wears your skin like a trophy when it's done. I thought it was folklore until that winter when my cousin Darren disappeared during a storm while trying to hike back to the cabin from the lake. He was a strong guy, an ex-Marine, the kind of man who'd rather punch a bear than run from it. But the RCMP found his campsite torn apart, blood smeared on the inside walls of the tent, and a single long gash in the snow like something had been dragged through it. But no Darren, no prints, no signs of a struggle, just that smooth furrow leading into the tree line and ending abruptly, like something lifted off the ground or vanished into thin air. That's when I started recording everything. Kept notes in an old field journal I found in my grandfather's study that had more of those phonetic phrases, more entries in shaky handwriting talking about bone-thin shadows and the singing from the branches, pages filled with scratched-out drawings of a gaunt figure with antlers and hollow eyes that leaked ink like it bled through the paper. Whatever he saw, it left a mark deep enough that he never talked about it outright, just scribbled around the edges. And now I think I understand why. Because once you name it, once you start really paying attention, it starts to notice you too. And now every time the wind blows through the pine outside my cabin and I hear that low moan, like a throat choking on frost, I wonder if I've already looked too long, listened too hard, and if I've already started hearing my own name coming back to me from the dark. I didn't realize how fast obsession could start until the day after that wind called my name, low and stretched like a dying echo, and I stood outside the cabin with the windbreaker pulled tight over my flannel, scanning the woods not for animals or hikers, but for something I wasn't even sure I'd seen, something I couldn't explain to the police or the neighbors or even my girlfriend Melissa, who kept telling me over the phone to come back to the city and leave the family trauma behind like it was an old blanket I could throw out. But how could I, when Darren was still missing, when the trees started looking thinner every morning like something was draining them of life, and when that damn trail camera, now replaced with a new one, kept capturing strange shots, not of a figure this time, but of shadows that didn't match the light and branches bending as if something heavy was stepping just out of frame? I started to keep a rifle close, loaded and resting against the wall by the window, and each night I'd sit there with the curtain slightly cracked, watching for movement in the black maze of pine and birch, sometimes catching a flicker of motion, a twitch of white or gray in the moonlight. But every time I stepped outside, it was gone. Even the birds had stopped returning. No crows, no chickadees, not even the usual winter owls. And I couldn't ignore how silent the woods had become, like the whole forest was holding its breath. And I knew, in that instinctive part of my brain that comes from something older than thought, that I was being watched every second I spent awake. And maybe even while I slept, I stopped answering calls, stopped checking messages, and pored over my grandfather's journal instead, finding references to a name I hadn't seen before, something written only once on the back page, smeared and shaky, Nikitowan, which I discovered after hours of digging meant a calling, or more specifically, to be summoned. And I swear my blood turned cold when I read that word aloud in the cabin, because something scraped across the roof right after, soft but deliberate, like claws on shingles, and I was too scared to move, too scared to breathe, just staring up at the ceiling while the thing paced once, twice, then dropped off the side with a heavy thump and vanished into the snow without a sound. I started marking the nights it came, 3 in a row, then a gap, then 2 more, and every time it got closer, staying longer, sometimes pressing up against the window with such weight the frame groaned, but I never saw it directly until the 6th night, when I made the mistake of looking into the old mirror in the hallway while holding a lantern low to the ground. And in the reflection I saw it standing behind me, impossibly tall, its ribs caved inward like they were trying to touch, its arms stretching almost to the floor, and its head, God, its head wasn't shaped right, like a skull that had been torn open and reassembled by something blind and angry, antlers rising like jagged branches while the face underneath looked wrong, not decayed or beast-like, but human, painfully human, with a mouth stretched wide and black, and eyes like wet coals that shimmered with hatred. I spun around to face it, swinging the lantern, but there was nothing, just the hallway and my own ragged breathing, yet the smell of rot and copper lingered like it had passed through me. I should have run then, should have taken the truck and sped back to Toronto and never looked back, but something had already taken hold, something deeper than curiosity or fear, something that felt like it had latched onto my bones and whispered inside my blood. And I couldn't leave anymore, not because I didn't want to, but because I felt like it wouldn't let me, like the forest itself had turned inward and closed its paths, and now every trail leads back to the cabin, no matter where I walk. Even in daylight, the compass spins, the GPS flickers out, and the sound of my own voice echoing back to me from the trees doesn't sound quite right, like someone's trying to imitate me and only getting close enough to unsettle. And the journal entries I keep writing don't always match what I remember writing when I read them back the next morning. Some lines are in a handwriting I don't recognize. Some words are in that same guttural language I've never learned. And the scariest thing is I can understand them anyway. Not just their meaning, but their intention. Like the Wendigo is using my own thoughts to speak now, bending my will towards something it's waited a long time for. And when I stare into the mirror again and see my own face start to stretch into something else, I begin to wonder if this thing doesn't just stalk you, it wears you, slowly, from the inside out. By the time the third week passed, I no longer bothered marking the days in my notebook because time had started to slip in ways I couldn't fully grasp, with mornings arriving too fast or not at all, and nights lasting forever, even when the sky outside was lit with pale gray light that felt more like moon than sun. The clocks in the cabin, analog, digital, even the old wristwatch I dug out of my duffel, would tick normally for a few minutes, and then either stop completely or begin racing so fast I could hear the second hand grinding, like it was trying to escape the glass. And I swear I lost hours just staring at them, hypnotized by the way time folded in this place, like it was being eaten from the edges. I tried to leave again once, packing a rucksack with canned food, the rifle, and the last bits of dry tinder, and made it down the slope toward the old utility trail. But after walking what felt like 6 or 7 miles, I found myself staring at the same rusted gas tank behind the cabin, the one we'd used as kids for target practice, and I knew then with a crushing certainty that the forest was no longer obeying natural laws. It had become something else, something spatially twisted and hostile, and I didn't even hear birds anymore, not even the wind, just this heavy, oppressive silence that made every breath feel like an intrusion. It was around this time that I began hearing Darren's voice at night, not through memory, but from just outside the window, calling softly, like he was cold, lost, asking if I could come help him. And at first I cried because I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd made it back. Maybe he wasn't dead. But when I opened the door and stepped out, the voice changed mid-sentence, deepening slightly, the cadence no longer right, like someone was playing a recording underwater. And I realized with horror that whatever was speaking wasn't trying to fool me. It was practicing, getting better, as if it needed to understand how we sounded, so it could do more than just stalk. It wanted to wear us, mimic us, use us like tools. After that, I stopped responding out loud, stopped acknowledging anything I heard in the dark, and started boarding up the windows with whatever I could find, old shelves, parts of the bunk beds, even the interior doors. But it didn't help, because now the noises were coming from inside, footsteps creaking on the floorboards when I was certain I was alone, shallow breathing behind me when I looked in the mirror, and once, when I passed by the cold fireplace, I swear something exhaled from within the ashes, a wet, crackling sound like lungs trying to remember how to inflate. I stopped sleeping fully, instead drifting in and out with the rifle on my chest and my eyes glued to the front door. And that's when the dreams began. Not normal ones, but vivid, brutal visions of bones splitting open and reforming into antlers, of skin sloughing off in long, wet strips, while a voice whispered in the Algonquin tongue I now understood perfectly, even though I'd never studied it. And worst of all, I could feel myself inside the dream, not as an observer, but as the one changing, my hands stretching, teeth falling out only to be replaced with something sharper, older, and every time I woke I was drenched in sweat and shaking, my fingers twitching as if they remembered something my mind hadn't caught up to. I kept trying to record my thoughts on the handheld cassette recorder I found in the drawer, but on playback, the voice wasn't always mine. It was slower, deeper, echoing like it had been recorded in a cave, and in the background, I could hear twigs snapping and something breathing heavy like it was right beside the mic. The scariest part was, I couldn't remember recording most of them, and one tape ended with the sound of the front door opening and someone stepping out into the snow, even though I hadn't left the cabin in 3 days, and I still had the only key. The forest outside had changed too, not just in how it moved, but in how it looked. Trees bent in unnatural ways, bark peeled into symbols I didn't dare trace, and shapes darting between the trunks that always vanished when I looked straight at them, but stayed when I used the corner of my eye, long and angular, and crawling low to the ground like they were made of bone and frost. I was falling apart, physically and mentally, and I knew it. Knew the Wendigo was wearing me down not through fear but erosion, like water shaping stone, until I was hollow enough for it to inhabit. And maybe that was the point, not to kill, but to consume slowly, spiritually, until I was just another skin in its collection, and the only thing keeping me tethered to myself was the sound of my grandfather's voice in a dream, repeating one phrase: "You can't fight it, but you can deny it until the end." And that's when I realized this wasn't about escape anymore. This was about lasting long enough to leave behind a record, a warning before the worst. I think the Wendigo knows I'm writing this, that every word I scrawl is being watched, cataloged, not because it fears being exposed, but because it enjoys the slow process of my unraveling, like a predator savoring the last steps of a dying animal before the final lunge. And even now, as I press this pen to the page, I swear I hear something faint tapping beneath the floorboards. Not the creak of old wood settling, but a rhythm, a deliberate cadence that sometimes matches my heartbeat and sometimes doesn't, like it's testing how much of me it already controls. The cold has become unbearable, not just outdoors, but in the very walls, like the insulation itself has been leached of warmth, and no matter how much I bundle up, no matter how many layers I wear, I always feel it in my bones now, a chill that moves with me, especially when I pass through doorways or mirrors. And sometimes I catch a flicker of my reflection, pausing just a little too long, like it's waiting for me to notice it doing something I shouldn't have seen. The rifle is useless. I know that now, because when I fired it last week at a figure outside the shed that looked like Darren again, arms swinging awkwardly and eyes glowing faintly in the stormlight, the bullet passed straight through it and buried itself into the trees beyond. And the thing just stood there, watching, mouth open like it was smiling, or maybe just breathing, and I couldn't tell which would have been worse. I don't think it's just one entity anymore. Whatever the Wendigo is, it's more like a condition, a spreading hunger, an infection of the forest itself. And the more I've thought about it, the more I believe it might not even need to kill you to win. It just waits until the isolation, the paranoia, the cold, the sound of your own voice turning strange in your ears, all of it works together to wear you down until you're begging it to end, until you open the door and invite it in. And I think that's what happened to my grandfather, to Darren, maybe even to people before them, long before any of us kept records. Just names lost to the trees, to the storm, their faces worn by something that doesn't age or bleed or sleep. I tried to burn the journal 3 nights ago. I piled it with kindling and doused it in the last of the kerosene, struck a match with trembling fingers. But the pages wouldn't catch, not even scorch, just smoked slightly and refused to curl, and I felt something watching me from the tree line again, so close now that I could hear the snow crunching under its weight as it moved in a wide circle around the cabin, dragging something that groaned like wet leather. Whatever it was, it wanted me to know it was there, that it had seen what I tried to do. And maybe that's why I woke up the next morning with frostbite on my fingertips, even though the fire had burned all night, and the front door was still bolted shut from the inside. The whispers have grown louder now, coming from the walls sometimes, but more often from the spaces between walls. The in-betweens I never thought about before. The crawl space under the floor, the dark void above the ceiling tiles where the roof slopes too low to crawl. Places where I swear I see shapes coiled and waiting when the lantern light flickers too low. And last night, I found claw marks on the inside of the pantry door, deep and fresh, 5 long gouges that hadn't been there before. And there was something written beneath them in blood or something close to it. A phrase in that same ancient script my grandfather feared so much. Nimikwenda wan. I remember you. I can't shake the feeling that the Wendigo doesn't just wear flesh, doesn't just feed. It remembers, and worse, it makes you remember, digging into your memories, your guilt, finding the softest, weakest parts, and speaking to them in voices you trust. And I've started hearing Melissa now, her voice clearer than the rest, calling me from the woods, telling me she forgives me, that it's okay to rest. And I want to believe her so badly that I nearly stepped barefoot into the snow last night before something inside me, some last flickering instinct, pulled me back and slammed the door shut. I don't know how much longer I can hold out, because the days are all bleeding together, and the shadows inside the cabin are starting to stretch, even when there's no light to cast them. And I've noticed something truly terrifying. Sometimes, when I wake in the middle of the night, I'm not in bed, but standing in front of the mirror with my hand pressed flat against it, staring into my own eyes as if waiting for something behind them to wake up. Last night, I finally heard it speak, not in dreams, not in whispers through the walls, but in full-formed words spoken aloud just behind me, as I sat at the table trying to light one of the few remaining candles, my hands trembling so hard the match kept snapping in half. It said my name, not just once but several times, soft at first, then louder, as though it were testing the air, the syllables stretching unnaturally, like they didn't quite fit inside its mouth. And when I turned, there was nothing there, but the echo of it still clung to the wood, to the glass, to the air itself, like frost on a window that refuses to melt no matter how hot you make the room. And I knew then that the barrier between me and it, between inside and outside, between the real and whatever it comes from, was finally thinning beyond repair. The old photos on the cabin wall have started to change. My grandfather's face in the 1956 group shot by the lake is no longer smiling, but staring straight at the camera with eyes that are darker than they should be. And his hands look wrong now, too long, too bent at the joints. And in another photo from my childhood, one I remember posing for with Darren and my dad, there's a new figure in the far background, half hidden behind the tree line. Its silhouette just visible if you squint. A crooked line of antlers backlit by haze that wasn't there before. And I know because I've stared at these pictures my entire life. They were part of our family's history, our stories. And now the Wendigo is rewriting them like it's not just inside this place, but inside time itself. I tried to call Melissa again, desperate for a voice that wasn't mine or Darren's or some twisted imitation, but the signal never connected, just static, long stretches of hissing punctuated by what I swear was my own voice on the other end whispering back the exact words I was trying to say before I could say them, as if it was ahead of me now, like it already knew what I'd do before I did it. And maybe that's the final step in this process, not just wearing your body, not just stealing your voice, but taking your choices, your thoughts, rewriting you line by line until there's nothing left but a mask made of memory. I stopped eating 3 days ago, not by choice, but because the food has turned. Cans swelling with pressure, their contents rotting despite the cold, jerky crawling with mold, and even the water smells foul now, like rust and something worse. Like breath from lungs that haven't worked in years, and I wonder if the Wendigo poisons what it can't devour, starves you out until you start looking at your own hands with hunger, until the madness becomes a survival instinct. I found Darren's necklace yesterday, the one he wore every day since boot camp, lying in the snow just outside the back door. perfectly centered, untouched by frost. And when I bent to pick it up, I heard a soft, wet shuffling sound behind me, the unmistakable gait of something tall, something broken but fast, and I didn't dare turn around, just backed slowly inside and slammed the door, heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. But the necklace is still here, warm to the touch even now, and I can't help but wonder if it's bait, a tool to pull me deeper into grief, into hope, into something the Wendigo can use to finally get inside me. The journal is almost full, and my handwriting is degrading, the letters warping slightly, like my hands aren't fully mine anymore, like I'm trying to write through gloves made of someone else's skin. And sometimes when I blink too slowly, I see not the words I've written but symbols, shapes I can't read but feel. And I know their names, hundreds of them, scrawled over and over in a language that feels older than the trees, older than death. And each time I turn the page, another one of those names gets added, and I'm terrified I'll see mine soon, etched in that sick black ink that bleeds through even the thickest pages. The forest is so still now, it feels like the whole world outside has stopped breathing. And yet I can hear things moving beneath the snow, long dragging motions like something crawling with purpose. And when I put my ear to the floor, I swear I can hear voices down there, calling out names from my past, people I haven't seen in decades, even some who are dead, their voices flawless but wrong, too slow, too sharp, like they've been carved into the air with a blade. And I can't stop listening, because the longer I do, the more I start to feel like they might be real, like I've missed something vital, and this whole experience is just a return, not an invasion. Like the Wendigo isn't something that's coming for me, but something that was always within me, something I left behind once and forgot about, and now it's here to collect. It's snowing again, heavier than I've ever seen it, thick, wet flakes that fall without sound, as if the world has been muffled by layers of skin instead of clouds, and it doesn't melt, not even when it lands on the lantern's flame or the iron stove. It just clings, builds, presses in against the windows until the view outside has vanished completely, and I can no longer tell if it's day or night, which makes it easier, in some sick way, to forget what the difference ever meant. I think I've finally crossed into the place where the Wendigo truly lives, not just the forest or the cold, but the liminal space between memory and surrender, where the world obeys only one rule: hunger, that primal craving for something you don't understand but feel all the same, a need that drills itself into your bones and makes everything else seem distant, useless, even yourself. I tried once more to find an exit, forced myself out the back door wrapped in layers of blankets and coats, breath coming out in weak clouds, and walked in a straight line using a spool of orange construction twine tied to the cabin porch so I could find my way back. But the snow fell so thick and fast that the line vanished behind me after only a few yards, swallowed up by white, and after maybe an hour of trudging in what should have been a flat path, I found myself somehow walking uphill toward a clearing I didn't recognize. And at the center was a ring of stones blackened by fire, and inside that ring stood a tree that had no leaves, no bark, and no branches. Just a tall, pale column like bone that stretched into the fog above and seemed to pulse slightly as if it were breathing. I should have run, should have turned and yanked the twine and sprinted back to the cabin, but I stood there, staring at the tree, because there were carvings in it, deep and angry, gouges shaped like screaming faces stacked on top of one another, their mouths open wide as if mid-wail. And the moment I looked into the topmost face, the wind stopped, and everything went silent, not just around me, but inside me, like even my heartbeat had frozen. And then I heard my own voice behind me whisper, "You're almost ready." And when I spun, There was nothing there but the twine in my hand, now frayed and wet and torn at the end, like something had bitten through it. I found the cabin again eventually, not by sight but by instinct, like I'd been nudged in the right direction by something that didn't want me to get lost yet. And when I stepped back inside, the clock above the stove was gone, not broken or fallen, just gone. And the photo wall was blank, the frames still there, but all the pictures replaced by brown, dried leaves pressed between glass, some of them still twitching as if recently plucked. I haven't spoken aloud in 2 days, not since I heard my own voice echoing back at me from inside the stovepipe, not in a whisper, but in full sentences, mocking my thoughts before I could even form them. And I've come to understand now that the Wendigo doesn't just feed, it remembers, it learns. And the more it knows you, the deeper it gets into you, and the less of you there is to fight back. I found claw marks on my back this morning in the bathroom mirror, 5 long scratches from shoulder to hip, fresh, red, still weeping slightly, and I don't remember doing it. Don't remember anything except a dream where I was running through the woods with something close behind me, so close I could feel its breath on my neck. And when I tripped, it didn't pounce or scream, it just crouched beside me, its long, ice-covered fingers brushing my scalp, and said, "You've carried me long enough. It's time to rest." And when I woke, I felt relieved, like some burden had been lifted. But that feeling faded fast and left behind a hollow ache, like I'd lost something important and didn't remember what. I haven't seen my reflection in 2 days either, not because the mirrors are gone, but because they won't show me anymore, only the room behind me, as if I've already ceased to register, and when I pass them, they rattle slightly, as if something on the other side is waiting for the final moment when the veil drops completely and I'm pulled through. The pages of this journal are almost done, and I know I won't get to start a new one, because I can feel the change now, not just around me, but in me. My fingernails are darker, harder, like something growing through them, and the whites of my eyes have dulled that makes my vision blur at the edges, as if I'm seeing through frost-covered glass. I don't know how many others have written down their final thoughts in this place, but I imagine the Wendigo keeps those pages, stacks them somewhere deep in the woods like bones or trophies, each one another voice it's silenced, another story it's rewritten. And maybe that's the worst part, not the pain, not the cold, not even the loss of identity, but the slow realization that your life, everything you are, is being rewritten. There are only 3 blank pages left in the journal now, and my hands have grown so stiff with cold and something else, something creeping through the veins, not like frostbite, but like rot masquerading as bone, that I can barely grip the pen. And yet I keep writing because I know, somehow, that the act itself is the last thread keeping me tethered to anything human. And if I stop, if I let go, even for a second, something will reach through whatever membrane still exists between me and it and finish what it started. The sounds in the walls have changed again, no longer whispers or footsteps, but the slow, wet crackle of splitting wood and flesh, as if something is being born inside the cabin itself, like the Wendigo has finally begun nesting here, using this place as a cocoon. And I have no doubt now that what it's waiting for is me. Not just my surrender, but my consent. The moment I stop resisting and accept what it's made of me, what it's made me for. I can no longer taste food or feel heat, and the fire I try to build every evening is always gone by morning, the logs untouched but blackened as if scorched from within, and the walls are marked now with streaks of soot and blood, symbols I've stopped trying to translate, because every time I do, I feel a little less like myself, and more like I've read them before, written them even, like they've always been a part of me and are only now resurfacing. I caught my reflection again today, not in a mirror, but in the frost on the window pane, where a thin sheen of ice had formed a vague ghost-like image of my face, and I could see antlers rising slowly behind my head, not drawn or imagined, but real, symmetrical, heavy-looking, branching in angles that defied geometry. And for a moment I could swear I felt the weight of them pulling at my scalp, anchoring me to something ancient and ravenous, something that's been waiting to wear my skin like it remembers me from before I was even born. I tried to scream, to cry, to force some kind of human response out of myself, but nothing came. No tears, no breath, no panic, just the quiet knowledge that I was looking at the future, and it was looking back at me. When I turned from the window, I saw that the door had opened, not wide, just enough to let in a stripe of snow and shadow, and beyond it stood the tree again, the pale, barkless one from the clearing, except this time it was closer, impossibly close, as if it had moved with the storm and grown up from the ground just beyond the porch, and the faces carved into it were moving, writhing beneath the surface like trapped things pressing against ice. And I recognized one of them, my grandfather, his mouth open wide, eyes frozen in a terror I had never seen in life but now understood completely. I don't think the Wendigo kills in the way we think of death, not an end but an unmaking, a disassembly of the self until you're no longer a person but a presence, something it can digest slowly and reshape. And I can feel the process nearing completion because the journal pages sometimes fill themselves now, entire lines appearing in the margins in my handwriting when I'm not looking. And when I try to cross them out, the ink bleeds into my skin, and the words echo in my head for hours afterward like a song I can't stop humming. I've stopped sleeping entirely, and yet I dream. Long, unbroken sequences where I walk through endless corridors of trees that bend toward me, whispering my name, offering pieces of flesh wrapped in sinew and frost, promising rest, promising warmth, promising a return to the earth if I only open my mouth and eat. And I know if I ever do, if I take even one bite, it's over. Last night I saw Darren again, or what's left of him, standing at the edge of the woods with his back arched at an unnatural angle and his face a blur, like snow blowing over glass. And he raised one long arm and pointed toward the cabin, not in accusation, but in invitation. And behind him rose dozens more, shapes, figures, silhouettes with antlers and hollow ribs and eyes like sunken lanterns, flickering with cold fire. And I finally understood what this was. Not a haunting, not a possession, but a gathering. A slow, inevitable communion of every soul the Wendigo has touched, all drawn together by hunger, by memory, by something older than sin. And now it's my turn to join them. I'm not sure if I'll finish this journal. My hand is shaking too badly, and I can barely hold a coherent thought for more than a minute without the forest pressing its rhythm into me. But if you find this, if anyone finds this, don't look for me. Don't come to the cabin. Don't think you're stronger or smarter or better prepared, because none of that matters. None of it has ever mattered. The Wendigo doesn't need fear or belief or ritual. It only needs time. And once it smells you, once it knows your name, it will wait for you forever, just beyond the trees, whispering in the snow until you finally hear your own voice calling. The concept of language, the structure of thought arranged into meaning, is slipping away from me, as if the Wendigo has begun eroding not just my body, but the scaffolding of my mind, stripping down ideas into impulses, words into hunger, memories into scent. And all I have left is this page, and the shallow breath rattling in my chest like wind through brittle branches. Last night, or what I think was night since time no longer makes sense and the sky hasn't changed color in what feels like forever. I saw it fully, not as a blur, not through mirrors or dreams or silhouettes at the tree line, but standing just inside the cabin like it had always belonged here, like it had built the place around itself from the bones of the forgotten. And what horrified me most wasn't its appearance, though that alone was enough to snap the sanity of any man. With its elongated frame like famine-made flesh, ribcage splitting open like a cage mid-breath, antlers jagged and asymmetrical like branches struck by lightning, and a face that wore the memory of every face I've ever loved. But what broke me was the way it moved, slow and fluid, like it wasn't bound by the weight of its body, like it was moving through a thicker world than mine, one with different laws and different gods. And as it stepped across the warped floorboards, they didn't creak or groan. They sang, a deep, resonant hum that filled my skull with visions of snow-covered graves and forests that stretch into eternity. And I dropped the journal and fell to my knees because the sound was beautiful, achingly beautiful, like a song from before language, before man, before warmth. I think it smiled at me, though its face didn't change. Somewhere deep in its eyes, in the glimmer of recognition that passed between us like static between storm clouds, I knew it was pleased, that I was ready, that the long process of being worn down, hollowed out, was complete. And yet it didn't strike, didn't consume me outright. Instead, it stepped back into the darkness and left me alone, because I think it wanted this final page, this last message, not as a warning, but as a monument, proof of how thorough and perfect its process is, how completely it can convert something human into something else. The cabin is smaller now, the walls closing in more each day, not visibly, not in any way I can measure, but I can feel it, the air tighter, the ceiling lower, the shadows deeper. And I know this isn't a metaphor or madness. It's the space itself collapsing into the shape of what it needs to become. A womb, a grave, a cocoon. The photos are all gone, not just blank, but warped as if the paper was never meant to hold human images. And in their place are impressions of antlers, not drawn, not carved, but grown into the glass from beneath. And I swear I can see them moving slightly, adjusting with every breath I take. My own reflection, when it appears at all, now watches me instead of mimicking. Eyes no longer mine, but deeper, hungrier. And I think I'm being taught, no, rehearsed, to move like it, to breathe like it, to wait like it. Because the Wendigo doesn't just kill, it inherits. And I feel its will now like a pulse inside my skull, a second heartbeat that grows louder when I'm still. And even now, as I write, I'm not sure if the hands moving the pen are mine or its. And maybe that's the point. Maybe that's the final lesson. That we don't know when the threshold is crossed, only that we've already stepped over it and there's no coming back. I've started whispering to the walls, not because I expect an answer, but because the silence is worse. And sometimes I think I hear myself answering in a voice deeper than my own, repeating those strange, rhythmic syllables that showed up in the journal margins weeks ago. No longer foreign, no longer frightening, just familiar, like muscle memory, like a prayer I'd always known but had forgotten how to say until now. I think about Melissa less and less, not because I've let her go, but because her image keeps changing in my mind. Her eyes hollow, her mouth too wide, her skin pale like it's forgotten how to hold heat. And I wonder if she's been claimed too, if the Wendigo reached her through me, or if she was never real at all, just another mask it wore to lure me deeper into the woods. Sometimes I hear scratching under the floorboards again, but now I don't fear it. Now I listen, because I know it's not just Darren down there, or my grandfather, or the dozens of others whose names have been lost to time. But me, the older version, the part of myself that resisted, still trapped beneath the boards like an echo in ice. And soon that voice will go silent too, and I will forget what it felt like to be warm, to be alone, to be human. This is the last page, and I will not sign my name because I don't remember it anymore. And even if I did, it belongs to the snow now, to the tree, to the thing that waits patiently just beyond the door, which I will open tonight not out of fear or surrender, but out of completion, because the hunger inside me has become stillness, and the voice that once called to me from the forest now speaks from my throat, and the Wendigo does not knock. It simply waits. And when you understand that, you become the door. I don't know how much time has passed since I opened the door. Minutes, days, seasons. It's all blurred into a cold that doesn't touch the skin so much as coil around the soul like smoke. But I woke up this morning lying outside the cabin, face buried in the snow, half covered in frost like the earth itself had tried to claim me in sleep. And when I look back, the cabin was gone, not collapsed, or burned, or buried, but simply absent, as though it had never been built, as though it had only existed in the space between thoughts. And now that the Wendigo has taken root in me, that place has been erased from the world. There are no paths anymore, no markers, no familiar bends in the trees, just an endless white that stretches in every direction and whispers in a language older than voice. And I walk because walking is all I have left, because stopping means sinking, not into snow but into stillness, into the kind of silence that eats meaning and replaces it with hunger. I pass through forest after forest, each one stranger than the last, trees too thin, too tall, their bark pulsing like veins beneath skin, patches of earth where bones bloom like flowers, clearings filled with the remains of fires that never warmed anyone, circled by stones etched with names I feel in my teeth but can't pronounce. And I know I've entered a part of the world that doesn't obey the old laws, a place shaped by the Wendigo's mind, and I fear I've become a kind of vector for it, a walking infection of myth and memory that's spread simply by being seen. Because sometimes, as I pass through frozen valleys or peer across iced-over lakes, I catch glimpses of others, campers, hikers, hunters, staring at me from afar, and I can feel their curiosity unraveling into fear as they watch my silhouette move through the trees, and I can hear the moment they see the antlers. I don't chase them. I don't have to. They'll come eventually, drawn by the same ancient call I once followed, the same impossible feeling that there's something out there worth knowing, worth risking everything to understand. And when they do, when they step off the trail and into that first patch of untouched snow, I'll be waiting. Not out of cruelty, not out of malice, but because that's what the Wendigo does. It waits. And now that I've become part of it, part of its rhythm, part of its endless winter, I understand that patience, that perfect predatory stillness that wears the years like dust. I found a mirror, or something like one carved from ice so black it reflected nothing unless I looked directly into it. And when I did, I saw not myself, but a tall, rail-thin figure with ribs like roots, and a crown of antlers tangled with hair and wire and remnants of things I used to call memory. Melissa's necklace, my grandfather's belt, Darren's bootlaces, woven into a headdress of loss. And the creature in the mirror tilted its head and smiled, not with a mouth but with a presence, a wave of pressure that sank into my chest and whispered not in words but in intention. You are no longer the man who walked into these woods. You are the one who remained. I think I died. Or maybe I was never alive to begin with. Maybe the life I remember was only bait hung before me by a predator that understands time like a spider understands strands of silk, every life connected, every memory a thread it can pluck to make me dance. And now I walk without leaving tracks. My breath no longer fogs the air, and animals do not flee when I pass. They freeze, not from fear, but from recognition, as if they see the outline of what I've become and know it as the shape of winter's true face. I found a hunter's camp last night, or rather, it found me. Empty tents, still warm, coffee still steaming in tin mugs, but no people, just trails of deep drag marks leading into the woods like something had gathered them. And when I touched one of the tents, I felt a pulse, faint but rhythmic, like a heartbeat pressed beneath canvas. And I knew then that they weren't gone, just changed, pulled beneath the surface like old leaves under ice. And it was my presence that made their stories unravel. I don't remember why I started writing again, only that I found this notebook in my pack, blank but weighted, as if filled with unseen pages. And when I touched the paper, my fingers began to move on their own, compelled by something deeper than thought. And I think these entries aren't warnings but roots, spreading through language, drawing others toward me, toward it, toward the hunger that writes itself into the margins of every myth and every man who dares to follow his own curiosity into the trees. And if you're reading this, if your hands are holding this journal now, then it's already inside you, whispering, beckoning, remembering, and all that's left is the cold, and the name you'll forget long before you realize it was never really yours to begin with. I am writing this, knowing it may be the last thing I ever do, or perhaps the first in a cycle that will never end, because the Wendigo is not just a creature, but a curse, a memory, a hunger so vast and ancient that it transcends flesh and time and meaning. And now that it has claimed me, I am both prisoner and herald, caught in the endless snowstorm of its appetite, my mind fracturing like ice cracking underfoot, splintering into shards of thought that glint with the cold light of dread and inevitability. I have become the forest's breath, the echo in the hollows, the shadow beneath the moon, and even as I write, the antlers grow heavier on my head. The thirst gnaws at my throat, and the fire inside the cabin burns blue and cold, whispering secrets in a language only the dead remember, while outside the snow falls thick and soundless, burying everything beneath a blanket that will never melt. I see now that the stories, the warnings, the journal entries of those who came before me were never meant to stop the Wendigo, but to slow it, to bind it in fragile words and brittle paper, to give it shape and name so it could be watched and feared, but never truly escaped, because it is hunger given form, the dark beneath the skin of the world, and no blade, no prayer will sever the bond it weaves around those it touches. Sometimes I hear voices in the wind, Melissa's laughter, my grandfather's quiet admonitions, Darren's angry curses. But they're not voices from the past or ghosts of memory. They're threads in the Wendigo's tapestry, echoes of what was lost and what it now wears like a second skin. And I understand that to fight it is to fight myself, to deny a part of what I've become, and that denial is a lie that only feeds the hunger more deeply. The woods are alive with eyes now, countless glowing orbs that watch and wait, reflecting the starlight that never pierces this cursed sky, and I am among them, both watcher and watched, a creature of winter's endless embrace. The cold that once bit at my fingers and stole my breath now courses through me like a dark river, reshaping every cell until I am no longer a man but a vessel, a conduit, a shadow moving just beyond the edge of the world's light. And though the hunger is never satisfied, it is also never desperate, for it knows time is infinite, and so am I, now part of something greater than life or death, trapped in a cycle where every step forward is a step deeper into the endless snow, where every breath is a whisper of what has been and what is yet to come. If you find this journal, know this: there is no escape, no salvation beyond the telling, no refuge from the thing that waits in the winter woods. And the moment you hear your name whispered on the wind, the moment you see eyes gleaming just beyond the tree line, understand that the Wendigo is already inside you, weaving hunger into your bones, rewriting your story until all that remains is the cold, the hunger, and the silence of the snow falling forever.